together. It's a pleasure to follow Sandro. He's a good buddy of mine. I've known him for quite some time. If you're ever in Porto, Portugal, do look him up. He's a great tour guide. So thanks, Sandro, for putting on that session. So let's get into the keynote. My name's Kent Weir. I'm a principal program manager lead on the PowerCat team. So we're a group inside of Power Platform Engineering, focused on working with strategic customers on taking their solutions live and public and ensuring of their success. And so we've got a lot of real world experience when it comes to working with customers and seeing these solutions basically in action. And so what we're going to talk about today is really scaling automation, and really want to highlight this message of what are the opportunities if you go ahead and do so. One thing I just wanted to check, is my camera on or is it off?
Your camera is off right now.
Oh, okay. Let me try to fix that. It should be on, so. Okay, is it on now?
We can see you. Excellent.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, okay. All right, thanks for that. Okay, so let's go ahead, let's dive into it. Here's the agenda that we're going to talk about today. Really, I wanted to give you some insights in terms of where automation is today, where it's headed, provide you with some of my experiences just working with a lot of customers itself. Then I really want to talk about how do you scale value to organization through automation. And I think I'm going to take more of a macro view of this as opposed to maybe the individual maker, and really think about how you can contribute to your organization's ability to scale automation and the inherent benefits of doing so. Naturally, you need a roadmap, and I'm going to give you that here today. And then also what we're going to talk about at the end is a new tool that PowerCat is releasing. It's currently in private preview, and it's really our automation COE starter kit. So I'm going to sort of open up the hood of that car and sort of show you exactly what's going on from that perspective and share some of our plans. And so look for that towards the end of the show itself. So just in general, where is automation headed and why should you care about it? And I think you should care about it. I think obviously everyone on this call has some interest in automation or integration, but it's extremely hot. I don't think there's ever been a better time to get involved in automation. And I think that the big thing is how do you sort of continue to learn and see what's evolving, see what's going on in this space, but really tremendous opportunities both for you personally and your own career, but then also as an organization. And I always like to look at it as what's good for the organization is typically good for the person, and where you can go ahead and show impact is generally a win-win. And sort of that's what I want to focus on today is giving you some of the tools to help you succeed, whether you're working as a consultant or working for a customer itself. And so I did pull some data just from a Deloitte Insights paper or study itself. And so what we're seeing is it's not too late, right? That's kind of a core message here. Now, naturally, automation has been around forever, right? Since you could write scripts, since you could write code, we've had some sort of automation. What is happening is it continues to become more and more sophisticated. And I would also say that the barrier of entry continues to be lower. And I think that is what's truly exciting for organizations itself. So even if we look at a survey based on some recent data, that 73% of respondents said their organizations have embarked on a path towards intelligent automation, and a significant 58% from the prior year itself. And so we continue to go ahead and see this trend. And I know whenever you talk about automation, there's also this uneasiness for humans. And I really feel like that narrative is changing. And I think the Power Platform is a really big part of that. I think in the past, and we'll talk a little bit more about this on an upcoming slide, RPA was a kind of a dirty word. It was kind of it meant that there was a big consulting company coming to take away your job. And what I really want people to think about is no, it doesn't have to be that way. It's one of those things where we want to give people the opportunity to contribute to that automation and actually create opportunities for themselves as opposed to have them taken away. And so I think it's time that we kind of really change that narrative, think about, no, we want to democratize who can do this. We want to bring more people to the proverbial party. And all in all, that actually creates opportunities. There's no shortage of opportunities when it comes to automation. There is a complexity scale, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in an upcoming slide. Now, when we think about like what are organizations doing with intelligent automation today, the one thing I do want to call out is, RPA. A lot of customers, I think when we work with big customers, pretty much every single one of them has some sort of existing RPA footprint. And typically this includes, using some of those incumbent tools. And I'm not here to sort of knock, any of the incumbent tools itself, but what I would say is traditionally those services have been delivered as a small team of experts. And what we can see, especially in the second arrow, is that there has been lower adoption of low-code tools. Now, I see these as kind of related. Like there's some correlation here in my mind in the sense that, historically we've had a small group of experts working on RPA. It's been a more sort of challenging, sophisticated tool to wrap your head around. But yet we've now got opportunities to use a low-code approach, meaning more people can now go ahead and contribute. And so I think that's what's super interesting about this particular slide and where the opportunity truly lies. I think where we've actually been able to go ahead and work with customers that have incumbent tools, it's been because of this. People will look at this as, I need to scale automation. I can't do that with my existing tool. How can I use the Power Platform, and more specifically Power Automate, to go ahead and to be able to go ahead and to scale this? And I think it's very much part of the Power Platform strategy all up. That's nothing new when we think about RPA. That's very much part of our sort of overall strategy itself, is democratizing the ability to do these types of things. But that's, I think, where the opportunity is for us. And I think it's the opportunity for you, whether you work at a consultancy, an independent contractor, or a customer itself. Now let's talk a little bit about some other challenges as well. And some of this stuff, depending upon where you sit in the organization, might be a little bit controversial, but that's okay. This is the reality. This is data, not opinion. So, some of the challenges: lack of IT readiness. We do see this from time to time. I think there's some concerns by IT groups that are afraid to sort of release some control. And I think that's part of our key messaging as we get deeper into this whole conversation, is how can you balance agility with control and governance? And there is an opportunity, and that's where we're going to get into sort of that roadmap and give you sort of directions on how you can go ahead and do it. I think what people have typically said is, I don't understand this. I don't want to understand this. I'm afraid of what could happen. So we're just going to lock it up. We're not even going to worry about it at all. And I'm here to tell you that's the wrong way to look at this, right? If you think about what's good for your organization is good for me, especially when you can influence it, I think it's trying to lock it up is the wrong message itself. Naturally, this is linked, resistance to change. When it comes to the Power Platform, I've been involved in Power Platform since 2016. It's been super interesting to see, having come from essentially, very little adoption to like huge adoption. And, over time, organizations, the light bulb moment happens for them. And they're now starting to say, hey, we should take a closer look at this because the pressures become too great to ignore it. And seeing other organizations doing well with the Power Platform, and it says, hey, how do we be competitive? Because at the end of the day, if you're not competitive, your other competitors are going to be, and you're going to run into some challenges from that perspective as well. I think another challenge, and I think, especially with the sort of the historical incumbent RPA tools, is cost to implement is a huge barrier, right? Not only are you dealing with fairly expensive licenses, you're generally, once again, if you're talking about experts, you're talking about costly labor pools as well. And I feel like democratizing that, allows you to sort of bring more people into the fold, allows you to reduce costs. Now, as an independent consultant, maybe that's not a message you want to hear, but there's always room for experts, right? There's always room to go ahead and to stay ahead of the curve and sort of to create opportunities from that perspective. But I think this is another reason why organizations are looking to the Power Platform because of, the lower cost of ownership to implement this stuff. And, for those people that have said like, hey, Power Automate, I get some of it included in my office, RPA is too expensive. If you feel that way, I would challenge you to take a closer look at the ROI of going ahead and doing that automation. And when we talk about the automation COE starter kit, we're going to help you do that. We're going to help you create those calculations. And then this becomes pretty clear from that perspective. Now, in general, all of these challenges prevent the ability to scale. And that's really what this is all about. How can we go ahead and do more? And really, that's a key part of the overall presentation. It's a theme. So if we think about scale, once again, this is from the same Deloitte study itself. When we had a segment of customers in their piloting stage, 37% of those customers had 1 to 10 automations. Then 13% of those organizations had 51 or more automations itself. Now, those numbers are extremely small, extremely small. Like we deal with some large customers that have hundreds of citizen developers building out automations at scale. And so when you think, obviously this does relate to the size of your organization, the type of industry you're in, but really organizations should have hundreds to thousands of automated processes. If you don't, you're really leaving money on the table from that perspective. And I think part of the challenge or the reason why, some of these organizations have a smaller footprint is that you do need to have that specialized team to go ahead and look at these specific use cases. And you treat things more like projects where there's a lot of like long red tape and governance processes in place, as opposed to having the people that are closer to the problem be able to go ahead and solve that problem. So, this is kind of a tagline that I like to use, is that like innovation doesn't happen while people are standing in a line waiting for experts to go ahead and service their needs. And this is why it is so important to think about how you scale automation at your organization in order to create greater impact, right? And so, this is a diagram, I created, it's not, it's representative, just in general. If we think about demand, there's no shortage of demand within organizations with ideas. What we've done oftentimes is had like what we call bot wars, where we'll go ahead and do like RPA in a day training for a specific customer group. We'll have a mix of technical and business folks participate in that training. Then we'll take them through some sort of like a Shark Tank or Dragon's Den, if you're in Canada, type experiment where people would go identify a use case and then have a period of like 4 weeks to go ahead and build out that use case and then be able to present it to leadership. And what we see is that there's no shortage of demands. Like people come back with ideas that will provide, tens of thousands of dollars of benefit to hundreds of thousands of dollars of benefit to even millions of dollars of benefit just by going through this exercise. So I'm completely convinced that the demand is there. Now, if we tried to get just pro devs to go ahead and solve those problems, we wouldn't be able to meet that demand. And that's where that opportunity is to go ahead and to scale and to bring more people into that picture. If you look at a traditional enterprise organization, your IT department is probably the 10th the size of the overall organization itself, maybe even smaller. And so those just sort of speak to the numbers and the pool. And I'm not here to position that every citizen developer is going to go ahead and do that. As we've gone through these exercises with customers, it's been proven. But what you are going to find is that there's many people that are technically savvy within the business that can go ahead and really run with this. So if we think about, RPA in general and citizen development is, the RPA software applications are becoming easier and easier to use. Generally, you can go ahead and configure them, drag and drop experiences. We saw that in Sandro's examples before. We've got the Power Automate Maker portal where you can go ahead and drag and drop these. You don't necessarily have to have software programming skills. I will say it does help. If you're used to writing SQL or writing Excel macros, those are going to help. But the other thing that citizen developers bring to the table is that their knowledge of the existing business process and the applications that are used as part of that business process. I don't care how sort of technical you are how many APIs or big data solutions you've built. If you're not familiar with, like, say, a series of business processes and transactions in SAP, there's still a learning curve there, right? And so some of this is within their existing domain of knowledge, and it becomes very natural for them to be able to emulate what they would do manually through keystrokes and mouse clicks, and to be able to do that through RPA. The other thing is that we've got users that are embedded within the business can also monitor the business for specific business events. So month-end processes, quarterly end processes. Maybe it could be just related to, like, if you're in commodities, right? Just commodity events or other market events, in order to be able to respond quicker, as opposed to like engaging, a project team to go ahead and look at it. Now, I'm sure for some of you folks, you're like, what is this guy talking about? Why, what is the role for sort of, pro devs per se to participate in this? And what I will say here, I come from that pro dev background, is there is no shortage of opportunities, right? Number one, there's a complexity spectrum. I'm not going to position that citizen devs can do everything, right? There's going to be more than enough opportunities to get pro devs to play a role, whether it's building out the automations themselves, or if it's really around creating the governance and some of the assets that can be used for your organization to scale. And we'll get into that in more details here a little bit. The other thing is we're going to have complex requirements that require more sophisticated solutions, right? It could be related to concurrency. It could be singletons. It could be fan out. It could be fan in. It could be, real-time messaging, real-time events. There's going to be those use cases, and there's no shortage of work for pro devs to participate in that as well. The other thing I would say is it's an opportunity for people that are really familiar, have these skills, to sharpen up or establish or further refine their governance skills, right? So when we think about organizations using Power Platform, there's thousands of them. Now, all of these organizations have similar concerns around, like, how do I govern this? And this is why the PowerCat team has put out starter kits, right? So we've got the existing Power Platform starter kit that's been around for a few years. And then today we're going to talk about the automation COE starter kit. It creates opportunities, especially in the partner ecosystem, to help customers get started with Power Platform, to establish their governance, the guardrails that allows them to go ahead and to scale. And then we get into, like, building templates, accelerators, connectors that need to be created to help scale. Basically thinking about code reuse, which is something that all developers have had to gone through, right? So it's thinking about what building blocks can I go ahead and create and then expose so that other people can use them and then build upon them from that perspective. And then I think the other thing is, like, an organization that's more efficient can move focus to more valuable areas. We've all been there, like, man, like, why do I have to go, like, fill out this TPS report, right? And why is it so clunky? And why do I have to, go do all of these, like, mechanical actions when my time is best suited elsewhere? And I know for some people they might be going, okay, well, if that part of the job is eliminated, then my job is going to be eliminated. And I think this is very organizational dependent, but I do like what one of our large customers, the way they look at it. If you work yourself out of a job, I'll find you another one, because you've demonstrated that you're capable in this space. And if you can solve this problem, there's much bigger problems in the organization that you can go ahead and solve it. So this is a very large customer that's very mature when it comes to RPA. And this is how they look at it. Can't say that all organizations look at it, but I think that is a good way to look at it from that perspective. Now, just in terms of automation benefits, I don't have to go through this. You folks have all been exposed to some of this, but there was a couple things I did want to call out. So improved metric visibility. I think, I've been involved in RPA for the last 2 years. Prior to that, I was definitely involved in, like, integration and automation in general, whether that's like Power Automate, Microsoft Flow, Logic Apps, BizTalk, etc. If I look back, a piece of my career, especially in the integration side of things, was like publishing those metrics. And I had a conversation with a former colleague, and they were, raising some concerns about the cost of their integration platform. And after reflecting on sort of what goes on in RPA, I'd said to them, I don't think your problem is that your costs are too high. I think your problem is that you haven't been able to demonstrate the value that all of your interfaces are actually providing your organization. And I think that's what I really like about RPA, and that's part of the reason why we really focus on ROI in the automation starter kit, is that we can demonstrate the value to the organization that our efforts are contributing to. And I would encourage you, whether you're in integration or whether you're in RPA, is don't lose sight of this, because when you have decision makers that are trying to understand their capital investments and their cycles and justification, being able to track this is hugely important. And so I don't know in the integration space if this happens a lot. Certainly in my career, it didn't. I think we were always very good of like tracking exceptions and being able to say what succeeded, what failed, and being able to sort of repair and resubmit those failures so that like the business process isn't impacted. But being able to actually attribute real value is something that I sort of look back at my career and I think, wow, we should have been doing more of that, because it also gets you a bigger seat at the table as well from that perspective in terms of like if you're driving real value for your organization, they're going to want to do more of that. Like any savvy business leader is going to say, we should do more of that. This is working. And so I would encourage people to really take a look at your existing processes, your existing telemetry. I think, generally people are always building some sort of like data repository where they're tracking custom attributes. Really think about the business case behind that and then being able to report that up. And we'll see more about that later on in the presentation itself. I think the other thing that, when you do have automation, it does force you to, better understand your business processes. I like to say that like if you automate a bad business process, you're just making a bigger mess faster. And so I would also encourage you to think of that. And so Microsoft is invested in some tools, process insights, and allows you the ability to go ahead and to take a look at your existing business process, understand where some of the bottlenecks are, and then being able to go ahead and sort of figure that out and being able to do that using tooling as opposed to, the typical round table customer interviews that, we've all been a part of in the past itself. Now, if we think about, just a tip for you folks, and just this is based upon, just what I'm seeing working with, dozens of customers in this space is that, if you want career growth, find a way to create scale. And I think that's, I've seen it many, many times with folks that have started in the Power Platform, perhaps working for organizations, and then, they end up in like some really awesome partner or even working at Microsoft in terms of, being able to go ahead and take their skills and sort of create this trajectory that may not have been available before. And so that's, for good reason, a key part of this overall presentation. One thing I'd say is I do have sort of teams here on my other screen. So if there's questions as we go through it, feel free to pop them into chat. And if I can get through them during the presentation, happy to do so as well. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about like the benefits and why you should do this, but I haven't told you how you can go ahead and do it. So now I want to transition to more of the how. So if we think about an automation COE, their role is really to enable the organization to realize their automation and productivity objectives. And so for folks that may not be familiar with that term COE or what that really means, what that generally means is that you've got a centralized team that has a charter or a mandate to basically enable something. And in this case, it's enable automation. And so naturally, they're going to be the people that, their neck is on the line, where the rubber hits the road, and are going to be overall responsible for like, hey, like this is either succeeding or this is failing within an organization itself. And so typically within these automation COEs, they've got a few different sort of pillars of responsibility. So number one is generally governance, right? These are table stakes. Like, do we have the right security model in place? Have we restricted access, to the appropriate parties? Is the data good? Are we creating a mess? Are we creating like inefficiencies through bad automation? And then just the ability to audit what is happening. Like that generally starts with like licenses. How many licenses do we have? Are they used? Who is using them? What business department are they part of? And, then, are they creating these automations? Are they sharing them? Are they abandoning them? What happens when someone leaves the organization? So those types of considerations. Then we think about, how do we create some repeatable patterns and templates? It's, preventing that sort of reinventing the wheel. And so what this becomes really important is these templates is that you can kind of think of it as a funnel. You want to be able to funnel information and be able to have it in a very consistent manner, right? Like you don't want people thinking about 15 different ways to record errors because you can't then build a dashboard on top of it. Same thing if you want to be able to report success or you want to be able to report like the transactional value of an execution, you don't want that being done in many different places, right? So how do you go ahead and sort of do that in a consistent manner? And then you might just have components. In this case, it could be a connector. You might have a custom connector that is used, for say that homegrown application that has been built internally. Or maybe there's a connector for a SaaS application that isn't in the Power Platform. You folks have gone ahead and built that connector. You don't want many people solving that problem over and over again. You want to solve that once and then let builders take advantage of it. And this is where there's like that citizen developer enablement, where these are concepts that they may not be familiar with. And it's a really for folks that are more technical to get involved in building that out so that you're building the almost like the platform on the platform that people can go ahead and use. Now, the benefits of doing this and doing it in a consistent manner is that now you can start to track your benefits, business KPIs, tracking, metrics, process rationalization. Hey, like, why did we have the same bot being built 4 times by 4 different business departments to go submit timesheets, right? Being able to catalog that inventory, being able to expose that. If everything is just a free-for-all, you're not going to be able to do it. And then the challenge becomes when the question is asked, what is the value of our automation program? If you say, I don't know, or it's quite fluffy, then you're in a tough spot. And so the whole point of this is how do you sort of create consistency, create like basically efficiencies and allowing people to build. But then this is like the candy. This is the cake that you get if you do this right. This is the reward. And so this is all about, like, once again, I've overused this term, but scaling. These things all contribute to scale. And so when some of you might have, if you've been following the PowerCat team closely, you might have seen this diagram or this slide before. And it kind of speaks to like the areas that you should be thinking about. And what we've tried to do is break this down by persona as well. And so you can kind of think of it as, we call it the layer cake. Credit to my boss, Sarab, for naming that. But we think about a citizen developer and what are the steps that they would go through as part of a bot development lifecycle, right? So, generally it starts with an idea, right? I have an idea. I want to solve this problem. I want to track the related benefits of that. Then you may need to have like some sort of training program where people need to learn the tool to go do it. Naturally, there's a design component. This is where an organization can choose how far they want to go. Maybe it's a peer review. Maybe there's a formal document. Maybe there's some sort of attestation that you've, followed like a design checklist. It kind of depends on how far you want to go with this within an organization. Naturally, you get into some sort of build process. You do some sort of testing. Once again, you've got some latitude here. Ideally, you're getting into like an automated test space, which can be a little bit challenging within the Power Platform at this point, but there's some things coming. It could be more of just a checklist once again, like, did you, use the right credentials? Did you use the templates? Did you ensure that you had sort of any sort of error like scopes instrumented correctly? Basically, making sure that people understand maybe this is a point where there's a review with the COE, and then there's some sort of deployment mechanism, right? And so these are activities that are typically undertaken by your makers. Then you get into the automation COE side of the world, right? Where, we're creating patterns and templates that people use. We're building monitoring and alerting facilities. And what's pretty cool now with, I also do some work with Power Virtual Agents or chatbot service, like some pretty cool things you can do with Power Automate and PVA, where you could have like an errors table and, reach out proactively through a chatbot saying like, hey, your RPA bot has failed, like, go ahead and resubmit or resume, things of that nature. Maybe you're building a custom telemetry store, like a central logging facility. You're building the DevOps pipelines that are used in your deployment process. You're building perhaps a code review tool, like a static analyzer that gets called from your DevOps pipeline to enforce these rules I've talked about before, right? This is really why this role is so important. And we always talk about scale because this is where you get it, right? This is exactly the place where you'll get the scale. Then we've got some other dependencies, right? We've got generally an infrastructure team, right, that are going to provide machines, right? When we talk about RPA, we've got, development machines typically needed. We've got prod machines that are typically needed. Sometimes these are physical machines. Most oftentimes they're virtual. Could be in Azure, could be in another public cloud, could be in a private data center, up to you. But there's generally a machine management component to this, right? You're assigning machines to individuals. You're keeping them patched. You're keeping them up to date. And naturally, you want to be able to do this in some sort of automated manner. And so we've got some collateral around this with using SCCM and Intune. I'll have a link at the end of the presentation that you may want to be able to provide your infrastructure team with. But this needs to be efficient too. If this is horribly manual, then all of this becomes horribly manual, right? Or there's delays. You can't be able to be overly responsive. Then we've got automation as part of the overall Power Platform itself, right? And generally, we've seen customers that already have some sort of maturity program or motion in place when it comes to the Power Platform. And sometimes this belongs in the Microsoft 365 COE or admins that it control some of this. But we need access to environments. That should be automated. We need the right level of permissions or roles for people in those environments. We're going to deal with data loss prevention policies. We now have that for connectors. We also have it for our desktop flow actions. Those are things that need to be managed. And then in general, network access control. What's interesting about a bot is that when you record the steps, it can go ahead and do the steps that a user can do. So if a user can get themselves into trouble by browsing bad websites, well, guess what? A bot can do that as well if you don't impose some governance from that perspective. And then lastly, it's important that we do have some level of executive sponsorship. Someone is likely investing money in licenses and all of this infrastructure and labor to get this set up. Now, how do you go ahead and use all of the components that you've been built before in order to build those dashboards that you can then come back and say, hey, we know we're doing the right thing. This is the value that's being returned to the organization. Then think about like the hierarchy of the organization, being able to break that down by different business departments, right? HR, this is what your benefits look like, week to date, month to date, year to date, quarter to date. Then we've got operations or finance. Sort of you name it. Being able to have that granularity is super important if you want, this program to shine. And so we think about creating career opportunity. This is it. 100%. This is it. If you can show this, and you're doing well, there's not a leader in the world that you won't impress by doing that. And so that's why that becomes really important. So want to share some resources with you as well to take advantage of, where you can go ahead and sort of get more details. This is kind of like the what you should be thinking about. And then here's more prescriptive details on like how you would go about implementing many of those different activities. So not going to go through this, line by line, but you can kind of think of it in sort of different buckets or stages. And as a result, think about some of the things that you should be doing within those specific stages itself. So we've got some rich content. It's a combination of some videos and then also some, we've got a white paper as well that's part of this as well. Fast forward this. I'll have a link to this at the end as well. But this will sort of give you more prescriptive, tangible sort of activities that you can go ahead and perform. So we've talked about sort of the what you should be doing. Now let's talk a little bit about some tooling to help support you with this. So the first thing I'm going to call out is that this is something that's brand new. We did make an announcement just before Christmas about this. It's in private preview, and we do have a submission form to onboard customers and partners into that program itself. I'll have the link at the end of the presentation. Now, we've had a tremendous response to this. So I do want to just set some expectations that don't expect to get an email tomorrow with the download for the kit, right? So we're going through this in multiple waves. But if there is interest, do let it know. Do let it be known to us. We will have a public preview sometime in the spring, and so this will be available publicly to everyone. But in the interim, if you are doing things with RPA today with Power Automate, do let us know and we'll see what we can do to get you in from that perspective. If you've already signed up and you haven't heard from us, we've started sort of reaching out to our Wave 1 customers this week. We'll start to reach out to some of our Wave 2 customers in the upcoming couple weeks here as well. So do ask for your patience from that perspective. Now, when we think about the Automation Starter Kit, I'll show you the roadmap here in a little bit. We're starting off with near real-time ROI and SLAs. Like, we truly feel like this is really important to get the right momentum when it comes to establishing a center of excellence. And this is very deliberate. It's one of those things where if you're trying to get a program off the ground and you need to get the support of leadership, the fastest way you're going to do that is showing them the money. Let's just be honest, right? So this is one of those things where you can demonstrate the value that your automations are providing the organization. This tool is available for all personas, right? This is not just about citizen devs, pro devs, regardless. It's an opportunity to be able to instrument and meter your solutions in this paradigm itself. And over time, we will be investing in this to deal with more governance related asks. And then also just like ALM and automation. And we're going to partner up and leverage some of the capabilities that our PowerCat team has already built, the ALM accelerator. And so it's an opportunity for us to partner from that perspective as well. So let's just kind of walk this through in sort of a practical scenario, right? Generally, what we see is that we've got some leader in an organization. I think this kind of depends on the size of the organization as well, where they'll be responsible for automation. They will have some specific goals. They have a budget, right? They have generally some sort of cost center, and they're going to need to be able to justify all of those expenditures. And so we'll have some level of VP presence and then an executive sponsor for that. And then we'll typically have different business units or departmental owners. In this case, we've got Victoria, who is the departmental owner for finance. And then within that finance group, we might have, someone that is focused on process and automation, right? In addition to their core responsibilities, right? So, in this case, they're in finance. Maybe they're great at, accounts payable or accounts receivables. And, they figured out how to build automation in that particular space. And they're going to go ahead and do that. Now, not everything happens in isolation, right? So we've got the IT group that is part of that COE. And we've got folks that are responsible for enabling the platform. We've got the automation COE that's putting in the standards, the templates, the governance, the control, and the nurturing. And then we've got infrastructure, right? We've got to manage those virtual machines. Then we also have, once again, depends on your industry, depends on your geography, I would say. We've got some sort of like risk and compliance, right? They're generally a stakeholder. And we have other folks like cybersecurity, could be enterprise architecture, folks that are concerned about what's happening with the program itself. And we need to be able to satisfy the needs of all of these specific people. And that's kind of our goal, is to put some foundation in place that allows us to go ahead and do so. So let's take just a practical example, right? So we've got our CVP that has established goals. We've got a process owner that wants to go ahead and create an automation project. As part of creating that project, there's metadata that we want to capture. We want to define like what is the process volume, what is the frequency, the human performance, and the expected ROI. So let's take an analogy that, let's say we're going to process invoice. And if we were to process that invoice manually, let's say like the labor rate was $50. We get 10 of those invoices every single day. And for each one of those invoices that are processed, if we can automate it, we're basically saving that labor, $10 times $50, right? So $500 a day. And so you can kind of think of that of like extrapolating that over time. What does that look like? Now, we all know automation, we don't live in a perfect world, right? So we also want to capture, if there's a failure, what does it cost to go ahead and fix that? Because that's important too. Like, that's part of your total cost of ownership. If it costs you, $25 or say half an hour to go fix a broken process, then we want to account for that as well. So that's part of the metadata that we'll capture as part of the intake process. Now, in general, what we've seen is that when you submit an idea, it needs to go through some sort of approval. It could go to like an automation COE lead. It could go to your boss as a business owner, but there's generally some sort of approval from that perspective, right? So we can go ahead and provided we've got the approval, then enable that stakeholder or that process owner to start building. And so this is where those templates come into place. We can go ahead and provision those templates in a solution in Dataverse that they can go ahead and start to use and build upon. So we can have like our try, catch, finally scopes put in place. Maybe we've got custom connectors for logging. Whatever we need to do, we can go ahead and pre-populate that so people don't have to think, and once again, start to keep everything in that funnel. Then we can go ahead and build and that solution and deploy it into production or through our various environments through an ALM pipeline itself. Then once we get to prod, we want to enable metering, right? So there's specific assets that can participate in a solution, like specific cloud flows that may not represent the entire business process being executed. Like, so for example, you might have child flows and you don't want to meter child flows because they don't represent sort of the primary cloud flow that's being called that represents the business process itself. So we want to give you the opportunity to select which are the cloud flows that you want to meter that get tied back to the business case so that you can go ahead and report the outcome itself. Then once we have this available and it's executing in production, then we can monitor it. We can monitor it for SLAs, like is this running within like the expected time frame? Are we getting errors? Are we getting successes? And then what is the sort of business impact from that perspective? And that's where we can go ahead and share all of this information with the related stakeholders. And so that's kind of the key way to think about this. Now, from an architecture perspective, like how do we achieve this inside of the Power Platform itself? So I'll give you a little bit of details here. So we can think of a scenario, we've got multiple environments, and then we've got a main environment. And when we looked at the architecture for building this, we wanted to avoid a lot of polling. And hence we've sort of used this type of model itself. We don't want to get throttled, right? We've all dealt with API throttling. It's not a good place to be. So what we can be is more event driven within the specific environments itself, and essentially install like the satellite solution that will be looking at the appropriate entities inside a Dataverse for when we have processes that are kicking off, succeeding, failing, etc., and then being able to push those updates into our centralized main environment, where then we can sort of point our telemetry reports on top of it itself. And so that's kind of our underlying architecture. So let's go ahead, let's see this, a demo of this in action. It is recorded, so I'll have the ability to go ahead and pause this as we go through it. Now, we did want to make this available sort of across multiple sort of experiences. Here we've got it in Teams. It'll also work inside of a mobile phone itself. And so that was kind of the view of the reporting. You'll see another view of this in a little bit. What this represents, this screen here, is essentially like our idea origination, right? This was earlier in that process where I think her name was Victoria. She was in finance. She wanted to go ahead and create a specific process. So this is a Power App where a user would have the ability to go ahead and click the plus sign and go ahead and start to track the related metadata for that specific opportunity itself. And so there's going to be just different attributes that we want to go ahead and provide, as a way to sort of capture basically our business case, and then this will get used as part of our approval that is sent out as well. And so I'm just going to pause it here so we can just take a quick look here, right? So we've got, the name of the project, kind of the challenges associated with the project, how long the processing time typically takes today, like manually. What type of process is it? Is it like when does it peak? In this case, weekly. How frequently does it run? What is the volume, process frequency from that perspective? The departments, the process category, and the complexity, right? So we also want to take that into account. Then we start to get like the number of automation steps that are required, the number of FTEs it takes to go ahead and do this manually, rework, if we have any sort of exceptions, what we would expect from an error rate. Like, let's be honest, automation errors will happen from that perspective. What would be the cost for the FTE, the working hours, etc. So that we're going to capture, essentially, you think of it as our business case. And then what we'll be able to do is extrapolate through the runtime execution of that specific process in order to generate some sort of output itself. So here what we've got is we're sending it out for approval. We're going to go ahead and send that off to, say, the manager. They'll be able to go ahead and review all of that information. In this case, they're doing it from their phone. They'll be able to see all of the sort of projected benefits from that perspective, and then sign off as to whether or not this is something that they should proceed with from that perspective. Now, what we're going to do here is this step is manual, but in the future we'll be able to automate this. Is the ability to provision the solution in the dev environment itself. But what we're doing here is we're just going to go ahead and create, essentially a cloud flow and a desktop flow. It's kind of like just a hello world type example, just for illustration purposes, that allows us to go sort of then have our solution that represents kind of the build stage. And we could go ahead and deploy that. And then at this point now, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and meter it. So we need to be able to determine which cloud flow we want to run that represents sort of the start and end of our business process, so that we can then use those calculations to extrapolate the value itself. So what we have here is, this is a Power App as well. It's part of our tooling. In this case, Automation Solution Managers, where you can go ahead and see all of the solutions that exist. There's a toggle here to toggle the metered solutions versus unmetered solution. And now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to enable metering for this specific solution itself. Although this looks like the Maker portal, this is still that Power App. We can see all of the components that are part of that specific solution, and can then go ahead and enable the meter for our Cloudflow itself. And so what we're just going to do here is we're just going to run it a couple times. And so what this will allow us to do is then take a look at our telemetry and sort of see the counter. You kind of think of it as ringing the cash register. Every time this runs, we're ringing the cash register from a value perspective, because we've been able to track it. Now, in this case with this model, what is good is that there's nothing that needs to be added to these flows to make this work. So you don't have to insert any components. So if you have existing solutions in place, you'd be able to sort of add the metering on top of it. So now what we're in is we're in the Power BI dashboard side of this, which allows us to go ahead and look for business ROI. So in this case, we've got 18 ideas generated, 15 of them have been approved. This represents the projected savings. And then here we've got some average savings from that perspective. We can go ahead and take a look at tracking like the machine utilization. It's a question that comes up a fair bit. It's like, well, how many machines do I need? And how do I know if I got machines that are sitting idle from that perspective? We can see just inventory type information, the number of flows that are available. Then we get into like the actuals, right? In terms of like increased efficiency, what are the savings that have been realized, the active projects, hours saved, and then we can track against different goals as well. Also other characteristics of like success versus failures, run modes, attended versus unattended, and things of that nature as well. We can go ahead, went through there quickly, but like break it down by different departments. So if finance wanted to understand what was going on in their department versus another department, we'd have the ability to go ahead and track that as well. So that's the starter kit itself. Let's talk a little bit about roadmap. So what you can see is this very sort of light, I don't know what color, it's kind of a light teal here. This one, this one, this one, this one. That's what's currently in scope for our private preview. As mentioned before, it's really around like tracking ROI from that perspective, giving you some like near real-time ROI, Power BI dashboard. Then we do have plans Like I said, in the spring time frame to get into some other deliverables, you can start to see more of the automation around deployment. So it could be PowerShell scripts, DevOps pipelines, inventory view of bots, the ability to export this data to like a data lake, just other resources around machine management, SLA monitoring. So just in general, just building out more of that plumbing itself. And then we get into the longer term. We don't have dates around the longer term yet. We got some rough dates, sometime hopefully in the fall timeframe. But just getting into more of the nurture aspects of it, like how can we incorporate, process advisors or make this available to a Power Platform Teams environment? How do we deal with human in the loop management for business exceptions? So we can sort of build some sort of framework around that. Auditing for item data like invoice updates, if you have to do like repair and resubmit, things of that nature. Then being able to create community of champions and bot wars management apps so that you can start to run some of these programs and have it all funnel into one system from that perspective. So we've got, this is kind of the last slide, just some resources wanted to call out. So I guess number one, if you're interested in the automation admin and governance white paper, go ahead and grab, see if I can do this. Probably won't let me do it. You can try to put these in chat. Should be a little bit easier for you folks. So this will be the white paper and then also the form for the private preview itself. Let's see that. And then any of the other resources as well. So we've got a lot of great content here. We've got some customer stories if you're interested in what other customers are doing. We've got the PowerCat team. We try to do a lot of content on our YouTube channel, automate it. We've got the Holistic Enterprise Automation Techniques HEAT, RPA in a Day training itself. So if you're interested in learning RPA, free sort of self-paced training material right there. We've got Power Automate Learn modules, so you can go ahead and learn more about cloud flows, and there's some desktop flows content there as well. So with that, open to any questions folks may have. Feel free to go ahead and put them in chat if there's any questions that you folks do have.
Thank you, Kent. Lots of great feedback. I have to say, it looks very exciting, and I just love that collation of information you have there. So I advise everyone to complete the preview form, as Kent kindly shared in the chat. Fernandez is saying, really great approach, Kent. Thanks a lot for the insights on automation. He's going to catch up later on that one. So, okay. So yes, so I have to say, Kent, I think what you've outlined here is a kind of an automation strategy, which often organizations don't really know where to begin on, and I think that's what you've exactly done, which is very interesting because I've actually not seen that. Actually, we all talk about automation, but when it goes about implementing it, it's another entirely different problem. And I think what you've done is that not only have you outlined an organizational strategy and a structure, but you've also shown how with the COE for Power Automate, you can solve some of the challenges when it comes to rolling out those automations. So, and to monitor it. So I really am impressed. Jennifer is saying, any white papers available on utilizing automation from utility company needs?
Good question. So there's so many use cases I can share, but I can't share publicly. It might be, if you want to reach out separately, Jennifer, I'd be happy to sort of share more information sort of offline, because I want to be careful that I don't sort of expose sensitive info. I came from utilities, so I have sort of many perspectives from that perspective, and there's a lot of like great use cases around utilities. Utilities is actually some people think it's a boring space, but it's not. There's so many awesome opportunities in utilities. So happy to share more from that perspective. Okay, so will there be Any other plans for industry vertical specific solution samples to use the automation COE? I would say in due time. I think for us right now, what we're trying to do is focus more sort of generally, and then be able to go ahead and sort of break into specific verticals itself. Like we find, you know, what like if our terms of our customer base, we have a lot in energy, a lot of energy use cases, people doing RPA. Then naturally, like finance would be another one uh, that we deal with, and then also I would just say kind of your commercial goods companies as well. So I think we haven't sort of dove too deep into any of those specific examples, but we do have like our customer advisory board where we do have some information we collect just based on industry verticals itself. So something that that we're sort of looking to do, but just hasn't been sort of immediate priority. We had to get something more general purpose out first before going too deep in any particular vertical. And Raz, to your comments before, I think you absolutely nailed it. That's exactly what's happening. We have a lot of organizations that they've bought into the Power Platform. Like they get it, they understand it. They might already be apps, and then they go, hey, how do I do this RPA thing, or how do I do this formalize this automation thing, and how do we get started? And that's exactly sort of where we're coming from, is giving both partners and customers sort of a strategy, and then giving them some tooling to support the strategy to go forth and to be able to go ahead and implement it. So that's very much our goal. So I'm glad that that message had resonated with you, because that's exactly what we're trying to achieve here as well. And I think there's no shortage of, I think, people that are using cloud flows and automation today. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's awesome, right? If you're finding ways to sort of improve productivity, go for it. What we've just seen is that, it gets to this tipping point where people start asking the questions of like, how do I know that this is actually doing something? And that's where sort of we've kind of sort of picked it up from there and said, we want people to be able to easily show that. Because I think that's what happens is, and sometimes you see these Power Platform presentations where it's like, hey, we've got like X thousand flows and we've got X thousand apps. And then it becomes a question of like, well, how do you managing that? How do you manage that? And like, how do you know that that's actually giving you business benefit? And that's something that that we're focused on. There's another question here. I didn't actually get to it, but thank you, Rachel, for bringing it up. So the maturity assessment scorecard, that is something we're working on it. It's in draft right now, so I would expect probably within the next month or so, we're going to provide that. And it's similar in some ways to the existing one that exists, the Power Platform Maturity Assessment. It's going to be more focused on automation, enterprise automation. And what we really want to do is give partners and customers a tool that allows them to essentially grade themselves on a maturity scale. And it's one of those things where, it's kind of like I look at it kind of like a security audit. It's like, you may not want to be a 5, like 1 to 5, right? You may not want to be at the 5 because maybe that costs a lot of money and you're not sort of ready to get there. But you want to be able to sort of create a baseline and sort of then be able to create a roadmap on like where you want to be. And then being able to understand like what are the specific actions or activities that I need to do in order to get there. And that's the whole goal of that, is to provide a very prescriptive kind of linear model that says, hey, if what does it mean if I'm doing like deployments manually? And then what does that mean like if I'm doing this completely zero touch, fully automated, right? And then give you kind of the prescriptive guidance along the way. So yeah, very excited to get that out. Like I said, it's in draft right now, and we'll share with that soon. I would say do follow us on Twitter. Do follow us on Automate It. We'll definitely be sharing it there. We'll also have a blog post on the Power Automate blog as well once that's available.
Well, there you have it. Once again, thank you, Kent. And a reminder to all the attendees to sign up to the preview of the Power Automate COE starter kit. That's going to be really exciting. Okay, well, Kent, thank you so much for taking your time out today off your busy schedule to share this information with the community. And we will definitely keep our ears peeled on the next announcements that you're about to make.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank you.
having me, and thanks for all of the questions there and the interest at the end. That was great.
Thank you, Kent. So there